Gonna get going here. All right, welcome back from break, everyone. Glad to have you with us, or if you're just joining us, welcome to the Collaborative Summer Library Program Summer Symposium. We're going to get started here with our session on intergenerational programming. We're hoping that you'll learn skills and techniques to foster that intergenerational interactions at your library. Today we have with us Wendy Pender from the King County Library System in Washington, and Jennifer Kulik from SilverKite Community Arts. So welcome, ladies. I'm going to let you share your screen and introduce yourselves.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Hi, everybody. Welcome from the great state of Washington. I was in Pennsylvania yesterday, so I'm still feeling like, what time zone am I in? My name's Wendy Pender. I'm the Older Adults Program Coordinator for King County Library System. That's the big system outside the city of Seattle. The Seattle Public Library has its own set of 27 branches. We have 50 branches in the King County Library System. And I see we're still waiting for the slides to come up. Take just a sec. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Oh, great. Yeah, name, pronouns, what library you're coming in from.
Sorry, folks, I'm having a little bit of problem getting the slides going here. It says oh, okay. Is it working now?
Yep.
Hooray!
We're in.
Great.
And you can catch up to me and keep going. Go ahead, Jen. Yeah, there you go.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, and sorry for the technical issue here this morning. My name is Jen Kulik, and I'm the founder and CEO of SilverKite Community Arts. We are based in Seattle, and I am an intergenerational arts specialist and arts educator. I've been working in the intergenerational field for over 20 years and have worked as an arts educator for a bit longer than that. I have done a lot of research in the intergenerational program field through Fulbrights and other fellowships over the years. And SilverKite received the Generations United Intergenerational Innovation Award in 2019, which was quite an exciting thing for us. So wanted to share a little bit about SilverKite Community Arts and our partnership with King County Library System and other library systems in both Washington and across the country. SilverKite creates intergenerational arts programming. We do that in person and also online. We have an intergenerational theater company that we create an original production every year and tour to libraries as well as senior living communities and schools. We also provide creative aging programs, so arts classes specifically designed for older adults, both virtually and in person. And we also do professional development and consulting around the development of intergenerational programs and arts programs for older adults. And it has been our amazing pleasure to be partnering with the King County Library System. We've done so for many years, and Wendy can share a little bit more about our program partnerships.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Yes. So when everything shut down in 2020 and all of us were in a panic mode, Jen was my first phone call, like, well, what do we do now? And we'll talk more about partnerships later, but one of the things about partnerships is having the ongoing frequent contact. You know, we had already done a number of in-person events together, and we create them together. There's a hiring of presenters, which we also do, but there's also the partnership where what do we need? What can we bring? What do they bring? So we'll talk about that again some more later. Can we get the next slide, please? Thank you. Oh, so all together now. I love this theme of the kudos to the creative team, basically. Isn't this what we need now? All together now. If you look at the program manual for this year's SRP theme, you'll see that kindness and welcoming pervades the activities and book themes at all levels. Don't we need that, especially now? This is my mom on the left, who's died at 103, but this is on her 90th birthday in the batting cage. We had to keep her in the slow pitch batting cage. And here I am in my intro slide. These are two of my sisters. I'm the youngest of 7. We have 22 years between us. So I grew up with an intergenerational focus with my older brothers and sisters. And of course, my mom was quite a bit older. And until recently in human history, everything was intergenerational. We didn't have the older people over here, the younger people over here. Our elders lived with us. And through a variety of circumstances in society, much longer lifespan, changes in education, changes in the workforce, together with people moving away from their parents, which was something new. We didn't just grow up and take over the father's farm like we had in years past. We've devolved into age-separated segments, mostly over the last 75 years. You can see this especially in the elder housing industry, which, by the way, did not even exist as a thing until the late 50s and 60s. Many of us have heard of Del Webb and Sun City. Until then, elders largely lived with us. With increased wealth, longer lives, the baby boom, some people found that living away from the hoop and croup of children, I love that phrase, their marketing phrase, in age-restricted communities was desirable. And of course, we still have that today, but you see it's the pendulum swinging back and more emphasis on intergenerational activities now, as we're recognizing that it brings a richness to our experience to have the generations interacting. And of course, libraries are part and parcel of the larger culture. We have also evolved. Think about libraries of a generation ago. Much different places, both in emphasis and scope. Our jobs have changed. That's one of the things that makes being a librarian so interesting. We are impacted by changes in technology, in social needs, shifting priorities, formats, demographics, basically everything. My job as older adults program coordinator was established 8 years ago in recognition of the changing demographics. Our brand as libraries is still very strong in terms of youth and family services, story times. When you ask a normal citizen out there, what do you think of when you think of libraries? Story times is still at the forefront of the things, but we have grown to include teens, adult services, and now older adult services. Like we're seeing, we need to adapt. And that's what we do. We adapt to our community. Later on, we'll talk more about library spaces and encourage you to think about how the generations interact in your third place. But for now, Jen's going to talk to us a little bit more about intergenerational.
Thanks so much, Wendy. So let me ask you this question before we dive in and talk about intergenerational programming, etc. It seems to be kind of a buzzword, and Wendy has mentioned it a couple of times in what she was sharing here. But what do we actually mean by intergenerational? What does that mean? So why don't you go ahead and, if you have some thoughts about that, drop those ideas in the chat. Program that's truly all ages, facilitates interaction and engagement for everyone at the same time, says Sarah. Ashley says, I would define it as something that appeals to multiple age groups and bring them together. Awesome. There's a lot of things in the chat here. I'll just read one more here from Becca, where multiple people, and I just lost it, where multiple people work to interact together during a program or event. Awesome. Thanks everybody for sharing your thoughts there. So let me share with you a couple of kind of bullet points around this definition of intergenerational, or defining intergenerational. So many people have made these suggestions in the chat, and I just want to sort of re-emphasize or kind of explain a little bit the difference between what I think of as multi-generational spaces and intergenerational interactions. So I think that they're very different. So multi-generational spaces or places or programs are when people of different generations are represented. So a grocery store is a multi-generational space, an airport, a library, all spaces where people from multiple generations are in the same place or in doing the same kind of thing, but they're not necessarily interacting with each other with intention. So intergenerational programming or connections are when people of different generations are interacting in meaningful ways. So there's an intention there where you're intending to bring generations together. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention too is often when we're thinking about intergenerational programming, we're thinking about bringing bookend generations together so that there's a generation skip between youth and the adults that are participating. So it could be like youth and grandparent ages, something like that. Although there are intergenerational programs where the generations are next to each other, but oftentimes when people talk about intergenerational programming, there's a generation or two skip between the groups that are intended to be brought together. So as Wendy was just talking about, a lot of factors have influenced the need and interest of intergenerational connections and intergenerational programming. And I really liked what Wendy was talking about how we sort of kind of boxed up people by generations. And this is something that we at SilverKite are working to try to create that natural cycle of life to reconnect the generations on the edges of the age spectrum, right? So some of the additional factors I want to share a little bit about that are influencing our need and interest in intergenerational programs are about the number of people in the US that are over the age of 65 and continue to, that number of people over the age of 65 continue to grow every day. 10,000 Americans turn 65 each day, and their life expectancies are longer than they have been in any other times in the past. And in addition to that, many of the folks that are growing older or after age 65 are more mobile and physically more interested in engaging with other people. So as Wendy mentioned also, there are several cultural shifts that also have influenced this sort of separation of generations. And those are things like mobility. People are able to move across the country or move elsewhere for a job, etc. Technology has both connected us and separated us. Individualized cultural experiences. So I remember when I was in elementary school, like there were 3 television stations and we all watched the same TV program and would talk about it at school. And now there's millions of things to watch and do and see at home by yourself, and which also has influenced the movie industry, and COVID has also contributed to that as well. And then Wendy talked about the living experiences and segmented development there. And there's been a lot of social documentation of disengagement with the community. Bowling Alone is a really interesting book that was written by Robert Putnam. It's a little dated now. It was written in 2000, but in the book, he chronicles the shift in disengagement in community during the 20th century. So all of those things and his sort of call for that interest for his perceived need for that reconnection of people together is kind of reflects that need for intergenerational reconnection, I would say. So I wanted to share with you a couple of infographics because sometimes it's you can hear the words and see the words, but also like having a visual representation. Just to sort of share with you this sort of increase in the projected number of US residents 65 and older. You can see it's growing quite a lot over just the next few decades projected there. This is from the US Census, and this is also from the US Census, and this looks a little blurry, so my apologies, but I wanted to share this infographic with you, which shows how the number of adults over the age of 65 will be growing more than the children under the age of 18, and it's projected that around 2035 that will be happening. So the need for connection there also is important so that younger people are not afraid of aging and are interested in entering the healthcare space and field, so that as this population is growing, there will be care and support for them as well. So kind of breaking down those age stereotypes and that fear of aging is really an important thing. Here are some benefits of intergenerational programming. So I'm sharing kind of a consolidation of research that I personally have done and has been sort of done over a lot of different studies over the last 15 or 20 years. The field of intergenerational relationships is relatively new. There's a journal called the Journal of Intergenerational Relationships that started publishing in 2004, which was like the first one came out right as I was finishing my PhD. So it was exciting that was happening, but there was no research out there before that. Anyway, it's a relatively new field, and a lot of the research that's been done has been evaluations of case studies. So I will share with you some of those kind of things that have kind of bubbled up out of those. So participation in intergenerational programming helps to break down age stereotypes and also to eliminate fear of old and young, which is one of the things that I was sharing before. It can create seeds of compassion and empathy, decrease loneliness and isolation. And I will say during COVID, in particular, the older adult population in the US has been very affected by mental health issues and physical health issues related to loneliness and isolation, which, many physicians and medical professionals have said that secondary impact of that loneliness and isolation has had a larger impact in some ways than the actual disease itself. In intergenerational programming, children have an opportunity to have an adult that's on their side, feeling special, and adults can also have a chance to get a second chance. One of the programs that I did several years ago had an older gentleman participating who had never been a father, and he had an opportunity to connect with some younger people and was very excited about the opportunity that he got to fill that role of father and grandfather for these young people, because he'd never had a chance to do that in his own family. In addition to that, intergenerational programs also help with the transference of wisdom and helping to re-envision the future. So we all have things to learn. We all have things to share. And so having an opportunity for people from different generations to come together and share their perspectives and their experiences can help collectively strengthen the community by giving each other opportunities to understand, things that they have learned in the past and ideas that could help take those things that have been learned in the past to reinvent or restructure a future. It can help adults with life review, and as we know from Eric Erickson and Gene Cohen and several other researchers, that this is a really important phase in the psychosocial development of older adults to be thinking about and reflecting upon their lives. We also found, I did a research study a couple of years ago that the young people who participated in the program that we did didn't have a really strong relationship with their own grandparents and other older members of their family. So the program that we did actually helped them to build the skills to bring back to their families, which I thought was really interesting. And it strengthens communities, as I was sharing before. So here are a couple of things from studies that I wanted to kind of pull out. I want to pull out the second one here. Older adults who volunteered with children burned 20% more calories per week, had fewer falls, and performed better on a memory test. I think that was really interesting. And then the last thing, which is also super important, is 97% of adult participants reported feeling happy, interested, loved, younger, and needed. So that was done by Generations United, that particular study. There was a recent study that came out a couple of months ago from an organization called Culture Track, who looked at a survey of older adults over the age of 55, who shared that what they were looking for in programming, and arts programming in particular, was fun, also learning something new, and social connection. So those were three things that came out of that particular study, just to share. And to wrap up this conversation about why intergenerational programs are important, I'll share another infographic here from Generations United. They pulled this together a few years ago, and this kind of talks about the economy and how it's beneficial for generations to connect to benefit the economy also. So, problem solving together and connecting to each other and to community is also really important and a benefit of participation in these programs.
Oh my gosh, Jen, it's not everything has to have an economic driver, but it's so interesting to see that there is an economic driver. Of course, most of us are heart driven and mission driven. So we're in there for the for the yummies, not necessarily the dollars. But I wanted to address something that came up in chat about intergenerational and all ages programming. And I have experienced the same issue. If it looks like fun, it's a cultural thing. If it looks like fun, people think it's for kids. So I agree, you have to work intentionally at creating a container where the adults are included and invited. And that can be peer-to-peer. Like I try to model an older adult having fun and being fun. We're used to the kids are in the middle dancing and jumping around while the adults are sitting back watching passively. And it is a little bit of a uphill, but put that in the work with your presenters and partnerships to model those activities and that engagement, so they understand the intention is for everybody to be in there together. I also wanted to, if you were looking for a place to start, I wanted to encourage you. I went to a Bill and Melinda Gates camp that was an intergenerational camp, and we used this statement, the question, what does the media get right about your generation, and what do they get wrong? It was a wonderful way of starting a conversation about, hey, yeah, I'm a teen, and teens are portrayed as, irresponsible or drug addicted or whatever. And I'm an older adult, and we get written off too. It was a wonderful way of bringing us together and reflecting on what do we have in common. So something like that, a generative question, can be a wonderful technique to get things started. Thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. So I would like to invite you, perhaps you're in your library now, and if you're not, I invite you to do this as a homework kind of experience, to really think about and take a look at your library and watch and look at how the different generations that are in your library are mixing. How many different generations are in your space, and where are they congregated, right? Do you have a kids area and a teen area and an adult area? Or everyone sort of separate in your space? Is everybody kind of passing each other as they're coming in? Are there other common spaces where students are studying and older adults are reading a magazine, for example? So just take a look at your library and just look at the space. It's really important to, again, as a way to kind of start and think about the intentionally creating those intergenerational interactions, to look at what you have going on already, and see how you might be able to build on that.
And this will be great as you're shifting spaces. A lot of libraries are undergoing some remodels. We're rethinking how we interact with our community as we reopen to the public. One of the things about all ages programming, it's not enough to just say all ages, because all ages is often interpreted to mean all ages of children, not all ages of the human family. So know that you need to work a little bit more at getting people to interact. And we've done a great job in a way of in our spaces of separating, because we want the loud children to be away from the serious adults, and the teens want their own space. So it is a different way of thinking about our spaces and programming.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, if you're creating a program and invite all ages to come and you have all ages in a room together, that's a multi-generational program, unless you are intentionally bringing the group together to interact together. And as we go through our presentation today, I'll give you some tips about, other ways to get started with developing those programs. Okay, so let's dive into sharing some. This is the nitty gritty part of how do we do this? Okay, we're sold. Intergenerational programs are awesome. All the research supports that. But how the heck do we do this? How the heck do we do this? So let me share with you some sort of practical advice and tools that you can use to help develop some intergenerational programming to tie to your summer reading programming, as well as using other times of the year as well. So there are 5 different structures that I'm going to briefly talk about how you can create opportunities for generations to get together. So I'll talk about that first. I'll share some resources with you from organizations that have like activity ideas and other ways of helping to get folks to interact with each other. And then I'll give you some specific tips about kind of planning the workshops and some facilitation tips, as well as some activities if we have some chance to do that. So I'll go through these kind of briefly. So in terms of enrichment programs, you can do these as a week-long program, as an ongoing program. And these kinds of things may include tutoring or mentoring or ongoing classes and programs with the intention to help foster deep intergenerational connections between participants. A second structure is a drop-in intergenerational workshop. And so those are structured workshops to have a project or have an experience together. Can be for families or communities. And then some ideas are here as well. And tied to the summer reading program, it could also be that you are inviting people to come and create do an art project related to a book that everyone in the group has read, inspired by a book, creating, things like, covers for, new versions of a book. So it can really just sort of stretch out here. I suggest that you can do these as drop-in programs, and I will say that SilverKite for several years has done a drop-in intergenerational workshop series outside under tents between a senior meal program and a family meal program. And so these 2 generations of people came together under this tent and engaged in art, and it was awesome. And because those populations were there in a similar space, and we popped up this tent in a park, it was an opportunity for people to come together, to make a project, to sit down at a table, to talk to each other. It was quite a successful program. So just a suggestion there. And also, if you want to have an intergenerational program, you can also have people register and take a certain number of people of a certain age in order to have a more balanced group. Excuse me a second, I'm going to grab a drink of water.
Sure.
Another program structure can be a discussion group. And so this could be an awesome opportunity for people to discuss a book. Perhaps the book is related to intergenerational themes. It would be really amazing to get different generational perspectives around a book, and giving people an opportunity to have equal say, to share ideas around around a particular book. Wendy, you wanted to mention something more about the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation discussion
Yes,
group?
I already said that about how media reflects. I think you don't even need a book, because sometimes the idea of having a book can be a barrier in and of itself, although there are some great ones, including ones about addressing cognitive issues, like um, something about holding grandma's memories. Like, I'm trying to think of the title. Anyway, but just how media reflects us and our generation, and what they get right and what they don't get right. One of the things on both ends of the life spectrum is that we feel like we're not heard, we're not taken seriously. So this is a great opportunity for the youngsters and the oldsters to come together and be heard, get that gift of attention.
And those discussion groups, thanks, Wendy. And those discussion groups can be focused on talking about intergenerational connections and differences between intergenerationals and similarities, or they can be on a totally different topic. And both of these opportunities are ways for folks to connect and to learn from each other, either intentionally talking about generational differences or not.
I see in the chat some people are talking about knitting, and I also have found knitting is a great breaker down of barriers. I myself am not a knitter, but it is a wonderful way. I have to say, card games can also do the same thing. I'm learning to play euchre. Lots of the people I'm learning from are much younger than I am. This slide is showing a community art project that we did at not a wisdom cafe, an arts and tech fest, where we were having people demonstrate different kinds of arts and different kinds of crafts and share how that learning was. It wasn't necessarily an old-fashioned craft, but it could be an art form like loom and hand-done textiles, sorry. But I have to say, this has one of the great partnership things that SilverKite has provided KCLS, and doing them online has actually freed up and made more possibilities possible, because we don't have to go to a place. We don't have to get in the car, go to parking, slide down the sidewalk. So I encourage you, if you haven't embraced online programming yet, this is an opportunity. Call Jen and see what you can do with the intergenerational arts space. So a good investment.
Thanks, Wendy. So I wanted to just mention, Wendy mentioned card games. We just finished an intergenerational program that brought together older adults, East African older adults from our community, with youth from the same neighborhood. And some of them had similar language backgrounds and heritage, and some of them did not. And so together the group decided they wanted to create a celebration and an opportunity for the community to come and learn from each other. And they created a game night. And so members of the community came, and the older adults and the youth were paired together to teach games. And so from their different cultural backgrounds, they each had different games to share and to play together. So it was a really kind of magical thing. So this wisdom tree was really cool. And we, those common spaces in your library where you have generations sort of passing each other when they're coming in and out of the door, when they're checking books out, when they're asking a reference library a question. Those are opportunities for connection. So this wisdom tree was set up as a way for generations to connect with each other without an official program in the schedule. And it was really successful. And it invited invited people to come and write responses to a couple of questions that we had out on the table. You can see those questions there. And then hang up their responses on the tree, and then read each other's responses. So you're learning across generation and you're sharing across generation. Some of the questions we included were things like, what have you learned from someone older than you? What have you learned from someone younger than you? What advice would you give your younger self? Like those kinds of questions. It was really quite cool.
And this is a fabulous passive programming idea. It's very little investment, and it's eye-catching, and it also promotes conversation. You can make this into a bulletin board, and it's a wonderful way to learn about your community. So I think everybody ought to be doing wisdom trees, just saying.
And you could do something, as Wendy was saying, like it could be a bulletin board. You could create a, have some butcher paper on the wall and create a mural and have your patrons add to a mural or a poem or a collaborative drawing or make some comments about a book. I mean, it could be a lot of different kinds of things. As Wendy was saying, a passive program or an informal interaction in a shared space. So I wanted to share that with you as well. So as I mentioned, there are a couple of different organizations that have some really amazing tools that can be useful to you in developing intergenerational programs. The first is Generations United. I mentioned them. They have a lot of resources on their website, and our slides will be available to you afterwards, but I really suggest you check them out. They have evaluation tools. They have all different kinds of activity ideas. They have a what is it called? Like a spreadsheet of organizations across the country that do intergenerational programming. There are not many, I will say, but they do have some listed on there. And it's growing, the number of groups that are doing these kinds of things. So they're a wonderful resource. The Penn State Intergenerational Program also has a ton of activity ideas, handbooks you can download. So highly recommend to check out their website as well. And the third one to share is Age Exchange, which you may not have heard of. They're based in the UK. I did my dissertation research with them, the first part of that research that I did. And they're at the forefront of reminiscence-based programming, meaning programming based on memory and life story. So I highly recommend to check out their resources as well. Okay, so I've provided you with the yes, intergenerational programs rock, and some ideas of structures of how you can do this in your library space, and also shared some resources and tools to kind of give you some additional activity ideas and structural support. And I want to give you some facilitation tips. And the first thing people often ask us when they ask us, how the heck do you find partners to work with for intergenerational programs? So I wanted to talk a little bit about developing partnerships. Wendy, you wanted to share a little bit about this as well.
Yeah. One of the things, people think, I'm afraid to go out into the community. You may not realize you probably already have partnerships in your library via your friends of the library. Your friends groups are typically older people, a lot of times older women, and they're a wonderful resource to get started on an intergenerational program. In addition to their book sales, which they're probably already doing, put them to use and have them be your interviewees or your interviewers. I'm sure they want to tell you about their children and grandchildren, have it go the other way. If you need a safe space to start with. I also wanted to recommend that as a way of re-engaging. A lot of us are still sort of shut down after the pandemic, or hopefully we're after. This can be a way of giving them an extra, we really value you, come tell your story, we want to hear from you. So that's what I wanted to say about that, as well as working with local organizations. Are you connected with your senior center? Are you connected with your senior living community? We take SilverKite arts programs to our senior living communities, and they also get streamed through the senior centers. So there's a multiple ways of working with different partners.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Wendy. I wanted to pull out, aside from looking for partners, I also wanted to pull out this first component, which I think is really important to think about, is the matching process. So if you are creating a program with young people and older adults from your community, here are some tips. First, it is amazing if you can connect with an organization that's close to your library, close to your community. As Wendy was just suggesting, senior centers, senior living communities that might be right across the street, a school that's 2 blocks away. So places that are close by so that it's easy for participants to get to the library, and those relationships that are started as part of the program can more easily continue and sustain. Okay, so that's a suggestion. I wanted to bring up the last point there about age level and energy level. So as you are thinking about this, you want to think about how the energy level of the younger people is going to match with the energy level of the older adults. So for example, some particular group of older adults really love the super young kids, and other older adults are just overwhelmed by the energy of 3-year-olds, right? So you want to be really mindful of who your people are so that you can create a match that makes people feel comfortable and interact in a safe and comfortable way. So that's just something to be thinking about. Some additional considerations as you're starting to develop a program: funding, transportation, as I was just mentioning, where in your library do you want to do this program? So another thing too are incentives. And so just to mention, you know, this program that we just did, this intergenerational program with the older adults that did the game project, as part of the funding that we received for that program, there was funding for them to receive additional incentives to participate, like gift cards to a grocery store, a bus pass, these kinds of things as additional, you know, kind of things to help support folks who are participating. So something to just think about depending on your community, etc. I often really want to encourage you, and we do this as part of our process, is doing listening sessions ahead of developing a program to figure out what do folks want? How do they want to connect with each other? Who is interested? What kind of program fits? What days of the week? These kinds of things. We really think about that phrase, nothing for us without us. So inviting, you know, a community group, going and talking to young people or having them come to the community library, etc., just to sort of hear, like, what does the community want, and how would a program best fit the folks that are interested in participating. I also suggest creating a community agreements at the beginning of the program, where all of the participants contribute to a list of rules that you follow, and put that up during the course of the program. That is a very effective way for everybody to feel like their ideas are heard and their needs are being met. That's really important. I often do prep sessions. So we always do prep sessions before you have those interactions. Sometimes it's difficult to do that ahead of time and meet with each group separately. And the kinds of conversations that Wendy was talking about around ageism, we often use that as a beginning conversation to get folks talking about, like, what are your feelings before you come in. It's also really amazing way to kind of evaluate the program if you have a session separately where you can kind of take the barometer of people's visions about aging and ageism, and then take it again if you do a separate session afterwards to sort of see how the program has impacted their feelings about their own aging and or people of different generations. A couple of other things to think about are supplies, and food is always a big draw. as you all
Everybody loves food, for sure.
Everybody loves food, as you all know. Okay, so if you are doing discussion groups as part of your intergenerational interactions, here are a couple of things that I wanted to share, just some tips. You want to take the time really to get people to know each other, and doing that, you have to create that space where folks feel both courageous and safe to share their ideas and themselves. Community agreements really help that. Also, if you're a facilitator, being vulnerable first and modeling that with everybody else. If you ask a question and then you answer it or you share something about yourself, shows that it's okay to do that also. Inviting open-ended questions and starting with questions around less personal topics so that people can help develop that trust. And then having something else available to help in case the conversations are not, moving very quickly. Sometimes coloring pages or something else on the tables really can help people feel comfortable, at least at the beginning, when they're meeting new folks. And as Wendy mentioned before, the key to establishing relationships is to find the thing that you have in common. So taking time to do that and helping and using icebreakers to help people really understand and connect with each other that may have things in common. And then I wanted to share with you this, my friends. This is SilverKite's secret, but not so secret because I share it all the time. Intergenerational programming sauce. This is our secret sauce. Here are the things that we follow as we create intergenerational interactions. This photo on the left side is one of those outdoor intergenerational programs that I was mentioning before. So that's an example of that there. So creating something your community would like through those listening sessions or surveys or however you collect that information. Taking the time to create that safe and courageous space so that people feel comfortable sharing about themselves. Creating relationships starting by finding the thing that you have in common. Creating opportunities for participants to be both teachers and learners as part of the program. I have something to teach, you have something to teach. Let me learn from you, let me teach you something. And then after you have had a moment where the participants feel great because they've shared something that they know or are good at, creating something new that they do together. So then they have developed that sense of trust with each other, and then they try something new and feel comfortable doing that and can support each other in that new vulnerability. And as I mentioned before, that study that I shared with you from Culture Track said that older adults really do want to continue to learn new things as they age. That was a big thing that came out of that study, which is really cool. So I wanted to talk through a couple of activity ideas of icebreakers and ideas to get you started on your adventures. So this is an activity to help you find connections in a very non-threatening way. And this is how it works. Participants are seated in a circle and the facilitator says something like, I am a cat person. And if you are a cat person, you just simply raise your hand, right? Or I usually start this activity by saying, I have been 5 years old. And every single person in the room will raise their hand, and it blows the young people's minds, right? If you have people that are older than 5 in the program. And it also helps, this activity also helps people see who other people are in the room and the kinds of things that they like. Another activity is a puzzle activity. This could also be a passive program idea where you have a piece of poster board that's cut up into smaller pieces, into puzzly sort of shapes. And then people draw on one of those puzzle pieces or write their name and some things that they like to do. And then the puzzles can be put together and then put up perhaps on the wall or in the programming room if you have an ongoing program. Another activity that helps get conversations started is a photo reminiscence activity. You can also do this with objects and also scent jars. It's really cool to use scent jars with this. And to make scent jars, you can put some essential oils in a little like a spice jar, and then people can open it and smell. And all of these things help ignite memory of different kinds of things that can help with having people talk to each other. So, for example, you could have if you're doing this online, you can sort of have the image like this, or you can have pictures laminated and on a table, and people could kind of pick up the picture and share a little bit about what that image or how that image connects to them. So for example, I look at this picture and I immediately gravitate to the tools, and I'm remembering the smell of my grandparents' garage and my grandfather, who would tinker with particular things there. Another thing that's really especially tied to the summer reading program, creating characters. It could be the characters from a particular book, could be maybe the group decides to create the next chapter of a book, or a backstory of a character before the book comes in. But if you start with creating characters together through creating like biographies of a character, by having a participant sort of lean up against a wall and trace their body on a piece of butcher paper and then brainstorm some ideas about a character, those characters can help you to create a ton of different kinds of programming, and oftentimes those characters can help people connect with each other because they're talking about the character and not themselves. So it's a really wonderful tool, and really, I think, connects super well with the summer reading program idea. Telling name stories, the history behind your name, and how you were named, creating a poem or a performance piece or something around those stories as well is another idea. And so now I would like just to share here in our last couple of minutes, we've given you a ton, I hope, of ideas and things to think about here in our presentation. So as you are considering all of these things, here are some tips about how you can take some of this info that we've talked about and take it back home to your library. So these are just some tips and ideas that it should be mutually beneficial, these intergenerational programs. There are intergenerational programs that one group is in service to another. Those are great. But the work that we do is really intended to be connective and also mutually beneficial for everybody. And second thing is that it should provide an interaction and engagement between generations, feasible in your space with the resources, the time, the space, the capacity of your staff to provide, and also how does it connect to All Together Now and to that theme. I think there's a natural connection to the theme because we are all together generationally in these intergenerational programs. So these are some tips to get you thinking about how to bring this home. And the second thing to think about how to bring it home, brainstorming ways to accomplish your idea, space, participants, marketing, supplies, and facilitation and logistics. All right. So friends, here's our contact information, and we'll have a couple minutes to take some questions.
I want to break in, Jen, to address a couple things in the chat and in the Q&A.
Okay.
There are great questions in the Q&A, and each of those is likely another whole segment in this conference or another conference. So I'm not dismissing them. I'm just saying today we're not going to be addressing a lot of those. But I did want to say, intergenerational, it's not the only thing out there. Some people were talking about tech classes where they were having teens teach older members of the community. That can work. We also do that. And peer-to-peer learning is also really great. I personally prefer to be taught by someone who understands that I'm on my 16th iteration of learning Microsoft products, and would they just stop with the updates, as opposed to, I'm not naturally drawn to, oh, here's the latest thing from TikTok and here's what you got to see on my Insta. It's a different cultural approach. So intergenerational stuff, it's great. And it's not the only way of doing programming. So I see the concerns in there. Think about your community. Also, ask your community. That people are saying, how do you get people involved? How do you get the seniors at the senior living community to participate? Ask them. We can tell you what we think, but if you're looking for an answer, ask the people for whom you want that to be a meaningful activity. So cultivate the relationship from the beginning by asking. Maybe it's not even appropriate there. Maybe that's not what they want. Ask what they want, and then you can shape on how it looks and how to give it to them. I'm going to go back and look at the Q&A, see if there's anything else running into animosity between generations. For sure, ageism is rampant. Even things belittled. Somebody's, how can we encourage generations to come together based on what they do have in common? Yeah, that's not only an intergenerational question, that's a political divide question. That is the question of our time. I think, how do we get people to talk to each other? Yeah.
Yeah, and I loved some of the ideas you had for icebreakers that might help get past some of those initial opinions different generations might have of one another, if they can, share those. So thank you so much. We have about 4 minutes left. I know you said that some of the questions in the Q&A weren't exactly things you plan to address today, but there was one.
Sure, and there are 2 others I want to get to, but go ahead.
Okay, well then please go right ahead.
Somebody asked, can you give more examples of the prompts for the wisdom tree? And I don't remember what those were. Jen, do you have those at hand?
I do remember that we asked, what was something that you learned from someone older than you? What was something you learned from someone younger than you? What have you taught someone older than you? What have you taught someone younger than you? What advice would you give to your younger self? Those were some of the.
Those are great. Also, I want to put a plug in for the All Together Now program manual. It's like 300 pages. I mean, there is a ton of things in there. There's also a ton of things in the, I'm the older adults coordinator. I'm more familiar with the older adults piece of this, but the books on programming for adults and programming for older adults, there are lots of ideas on all of these. You don't have to get it all today. Oh, and somebody asked, if you wanted to do a program geared for teens and seniors, how could you promote it, or what would you call it? That's a perfect example. I would ask them, hey, we're thinking about doing a program for teens and seniors. What do you think we should call that? How do you think we should promote it? Ask them. Oh, and Sarah White says she would like to address that live. That's fine with me. I don't know how to make that happen.
I wanted to address something about, there were a couple of concerns about vetting seniors or vetting people to connect, and also generational divides. So we had a situation in one of our intergenerational programs where there was a racist comment that was brought up as part of our one of our discussion groups, and so one of the young people let me know about that, and then we brought it to the whole group and we talked about it as a whole group, and addressed that issue, and then as a group addressed the how do we talk about these difficult things together, how do we talk about how do we make sure that everybody is safe those kinds of things. So the community agreements is a really important way to get that started. But if it comes up as part of it, and make sure that you have a relationship with the people who are participating, so that they feel comfortable talking to you as the facilitator outside to let you know if something has come up that makes them feel uncomfortable. Again, depending on what issue it is that comes up, but if there's an issue that discussion that would be beneficial for everybody in the group, I usually bring it to the group for a conversation. And then there was also a couple of people talking about a pen pal program and sort of vetting. So during the pandemic, we led several pen pal programs, and the way that we did it was we worked with a senior living community to help us identify which seniors would be sort of good to participate in the program. And then we read the letters before they were given to the students. So they were sort of collected as a group. They were read and sort of screened, and then we passed them along to the school. The teachers read and screened them before they went to the students. So they weren't like writing directly to each other. They were writing in the groups, and then they were sort of screened and vetted on both ends.
And we've continued to do that. We're pretty conservative about we didn't translate our teen teaching elders tech program online because it wasn't supervised enough, frankly. We didn't want vulnerable elders to be exposed to anything. We didn't want minors to be exposed. So you do need to be cautious. You do need to vet your presenters and programs and be there, be a presence, just like you would if it were happening in your meeting room, not turning people loose and just say, hey, have at it, go forth. But use each other. We've got such a community of support within the library world. So if we didn't get to your question, we apologize for that, but feel free to reach out to us and reach out to each other.
Yeah, Wendy and Jen, I want to thank you so much for presenting today. We would like to invite the two of you, if you have a moment, to maybe answer in writing some of the questions as we go to break that are in the Q&A, if you have time and you feel like you can. If you can't, that's okay. But everyone else, we will break from 3 to 3:30 Eastern time, and then we will come back at 3:30 Eastern for our final session today, which is decorating together. So we'll have lots of wonderful ideas on how to decorate your libraries this summer. Thanks again, Wendy and Jen, and we will see you all in about a half an hour. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I cannot stay. I'm double booked.
No problem. No problem.
I'll do a little writing. I'll do a little writing.
Thanks, Jen.
That'd be great.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much.